Hi, welcome to today's episode of Voices of Virtue. I'm Zoe Castro,
I'm Lin.
and we'll be debating about whether humility or patience is essential for living the good life. I'm gonna start first. I think, in a Christian perspective, I think the good life is where I'm living according to God, where I have a good and deep relationship with God.
Well, for me, the good life isn't just be happy or successful. It's about becoming a good person. And as Karen Swallow Prime in remind us reading well, the book on reading well, the good life is shaped by virtue, not by having everything go our way, and it's about living with meaning, growing in character, and learning how to love others well.
That's good. Okay, so I will be talking about humility, and while Lynn will be talking about patience. So while I agree that all virtues work together to create the good life for oneself, I believe that humility is the virtue that is most essential to attaining the good life, because it allows us to see ourselves for who we truly are, live with gratitude, not pride, and serves as the foundation for all virtues.
Well, first I'm gonna say, before I talk about why I think patience is the most important, I'm gonna first talk about the definition of patience. So I think patience doesn't mean just simply wait and doing nothing. So before I read on reading well, I think patience is like the ability of how long you can wait, but it actually not. And priority set writes, patience is not passively but perseverance. And real patience is active endurance, and it's choosing not to give up when things are hard, and it's stay faithful when everything in us wants to walk away.
What do you think that? Wait, you said that patience is the most important, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just talk about like why I think humility is most important.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna say that I'm gonna reference page 235 to 236, a proper valuing of oneself. Basically, the passage talks about how humility prevents us from being too prideful, because if we're too prideful, we won't be able to see the value of being kind or patient or having courage. It also frees us from criticizing not just ourselves but also others. And when we truly see who we are for what we're worth, we learn to better respect and love others as well. And I think those are such important like factors of living the good life, because according to like God, not God, sorry, like the Bible, we have to love ourselves and love God in order to truly live the good life, or at least that's what I interpreted it. So yeah.
So humility is help us recognize our limits and listen to others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the reason why I think patience is the most important virtue is because we know that patience need to have suffering, and suffering is also very important part of the good life. So suffering isn't something that we enjoy or looking for, but it's something no one can escape. We all face losses, disappointment, or pain at some point. But in a life shaped by virtue, suffering isn't meaningless. It becomes the soil where good characters grows. And patience need to be suffered, and patience is what help us face suffering without bitterness or despair.
I like that. Just to clarify, you said that patience, in order to have patience, you need to suffer, right?
Yes.
Okay, I remember we talked about that with Mr. Montes. And then I think I had a question about there's a quote in on Reading Well on page 198 where it says, patience is a virtue only if the cause for which that person suffers is good. I kind of wrote down like patience is kind of similar to courage, since they both have to suffer in order to be like courageous or patient. But I don't really like the fact that it's like you have to suffer, like whether it be physical, emotional, or socially suffering. I don't really like that part because does that really help us attain the good life if we're suffering, you know?
That's a good question. So I was also very confusing about the suffering part of the patience when I was reading the book. And after that, when I think deeply, I think that like the good life can't really live without suffering, because suffering doesn't stop the good life. It it often forms the good life, because the God suffering for us, and we also need to suffering to achieve the good life.
Mm. So I'm just from what you're saying, like since God suffered for us, that's like being considered patient. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Well, maybe.
No, no. And there's like a similar quote of that in Karen Swallow Prior's chapter 12 of humility, saying that like before there's salvation there must be recognition of guilt, or like humility, which leads to the proper valuing of oneself in the light of real relationships one's encounters. And then there's another quote that I could related to that, where Christ degraded himself, stooped low, and gave up his rightful and lofty place in heaven in order to share our humanity with us. And then like what I kind of wrote in that book and for that section was that Christ's humiliation is the reason why humility is at the center of the good life, because he, despite being God's son, he went down into earth according to God, and then just lived among us as humans, and then died for our sins, which is like, he died for our sins, which is kind of humiliating for us as humans, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's also shows how humility and patience connect to each other. It's actually two very similar virtue.
Wait, that's really good. So, like what I've been saying about humility, when you're humble, you develop a more empathetic view of like others. You become more empathetic. You learn to love yourself. You learn to love God. And then there's an article that I read called "Why Is It Important to Stay Humble" by Tiara Blaine. There's a quote that I specifically wrote down. You develop a more kind approach to interacting with others, but also influences how you perceive yourself in the world around you. It relates to Prior's quote that gaining humility isn't about degradation, because being humble allows you to let yourself improve by setting your pride aside and knowing the things you need to improvement on.
Oh, that's a very good sources. So I also have a outside source of my virtues. So the book Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit, and she writes that hope is an embrace of the unknown. So patience is the same kind of trust, and it's believing that something good can confront hard seasons, even if we can't see it yet. And patience gives us room to grow through suffering instead of running from it, and that's exactly what a good life requires. No, not perfection, but endurance.
Oh, I really like that one. I do agree though that being patient does give us room to grow. Let's see. I have another quote from the book that Mr. Montes kind of like pointed out. We were doing this like activity where we were trying to do like the main definitions for each virtue, and what he wrote was humility is thinking less about yourself and not thinking less of yourself. I believe this is also a good quote because it's like because like what I've been saying, being humble allows you to be empathetic and allows you to grow, and yeah. I also put this down because like a lot of people don't really know what the true meaning of humility was. Like going into this like book, I knew humility means being humble, which okay, that's like a really weird definition of humility. But like reading this book, reading Pryor's definition of humility, I see now why humility is misunderstood, because people associate humility with having a lack of self-esteem, which I get, yeah. But in reality, humility means having a good and true understanding of yourself, not about yourself.
Okay, that's a very good point. So I have a question about the definition of humility. What do you think about the access and the lacking of humanity gonna look like?
Oh, yeah, we did like the excess, right? We did talk about that. I think we said the lack of humility was pride, which goes with Karen Swallow Pryor's book about, or like quote about being pride distorting how we see ourselves. And then I think we said that the excess is like self-hatred and carelessness, which I know is like really, really bad, and it doesn't lead to the good life. But humility is like the in-between for a reason. Because like in Karen Swallow Pryor's like definition, humility is seeing yourself below God, but seeing yourself as an equal to others.
So do you think that people can have patience without humility?
But that's a good question. I do think that people can have patience with humility. I think like I know I said that like humility is the center of the good life, but I do think patience does lead to humility. Just because it's like you have to being humble can be like so draining, but if you're patient, you can know and you can learn that humility is the center for a reason, because it leads to like repetition. It leads to empathy and a better understanding of yourself. So
Yeah, so that's also the reason why I think like patience is more important than humility. And as we are talking about humanity, help us know better about ourselves and recognize our limits and listen to others. So the reason why I think patient comes first is that because we can't truly be humble without learning how to endure uncomfortable truths and correction or slow growth. And all of that requires patience. And patience allows humanity to take root, and it gives us time and space to learn and to grow.
that's a good point. I actually have a question. So on page 193, it says that like while suffering is inevitable, we can choose how we bear it. Do you think that like a person who's suffering something bad, I'm not gonna give an example. Do you think a person who's like suffering something bad but chooses to like just ignore it and just puts it aside as a patient?
So I think that's definitely not patience because, patience is more about the ability to like face suffering, and suffering is like very important to patience. So if you cannot face suffering, that's not patience.
I see.
Well, I think we can also talk about what's happened to a person's character or community when the virtues we are talking about are missing.
Yeah, okay, I can go first. So, if a person doesn't have humility, like what I've been saying, humility allows us to be empathetic. But if the virtue of humility is missing in a person's character, it can lead them to either be careless about themselves or lead them to have too much pride, which is also kind of what we've been talking about in our debate, or not debate, sorry, in our like discussion with Mr. Montes about how having too much pride can lead you to undermine everybody. And there's a quote in Karen Swallow Pryor's book about how gratitude requires humility, and gratitude is like the appreciating of people's like efforts. So I definitely think that if humility is missing in a person, you won't be able to be like thankful for a person.
That's a good thought. So for patience, I think when someone doesn't have patience, they tend to act on impulse and they get frustrated easily and they rush decisions and they give up faster. And over time, that kind of attitude doesn't just affect them, it shapes who they become, and it can make a person more anxious, more bitter, and less able to handle life's struggles. And that's not just for a person, and communities also break down without patience, because if people can wait for each other, cannot give each other grace, or cannot endure hard time together, and so trust started to disappear with that, and conflict grew faster, and people stopped listening to one another. And that's why I think that patience is like the glue that holds character and community together, and without it, both start to fall apart.
I definitely see that. Like, especially today in our culture, not a lot of people have patience, you know?
Yeah.
So they usually, like, I mean, I know this is bad referencing TikTok and all, but I've seen videos on TikTok and like Instagram and YouTube of people like acting super rash, and it leads to bad consequences. So I do think, yeah, patience is definitely important when considering a community, you know?
Yeah. So TikTok actually remind me something about why patience is important, because I like watching TikTok and I almost spend like maybe 4 hours each day for TikTok, and because of that I got no time for reading, and I don't like reading at all. And as the book said, like reading is actually the main way for us to cultivate the virtue. And so without patience, I think we like cannot actually reading well.
Yeah, I get what you mean, especially, and we've also just read an article that Mr. Montes and ChatGPT wrote about how reading like helps you cultivate virtues like patience, kindness, humility. So I do think that those are really important when reading, and we don't really see it. I'm trying to relate it to our culture and our generation today. Humility and patience, I think, are the two most undermined values, just because they don't know how to act upon it, and they don't know like the true meaning of humility or patience.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to relating it to the real world, I'm gonna apply this to like our generation, our like real life, daily life. You know, in a conflict, what do you think would help more, humility or patience? Because you know, humility allows you to be humble and admit you're wrong, and then patience is like you have to be patient with the other person you're conflicting with. You know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's both very important, because you need patience to if you don't have patience, you cannot like listen to others' argument well, and you cannot like really respond it. And without humility, like you cannot actually see what you were doing wrong.
Go ahead.
So did you change your point about which one is more important to that good life?
Mm, I mean, I still do believe that humility is essential, but I do think, like, while all virtues are obviously important, I do believe that patience and humility are probably the two most important, just because, like, patience allows us to, like, well, be patient, and it allows us to, like what Lynn says, it gives us room to grow from our suffering. And then humility is also important. Well, patience leads to humility, because if you're patient, you learn to like love yourself, you know, and be empathetic and be thankful for everyone and everything around you.
Yeah, that's also what I thought, because humanity can really live without patience, and patience can really live without humility.
Okay. I think we touched everything.
Yeah, that's our conclusion, probably.
Yeah, that's our conclusion. Well, I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for listening.
This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. CVCS is a Christian TK through 12 school in San Juan Capistrano, California. Please visit cvcs.org/podcasts to listen to the variety of shows our students produce on our campus. You can also find all of our shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and others. We would also appreciate you subscribing to and leaving a review of this show and the other shows on our network in your podcast player of choice. If you have any questions or would like to reach out to us, please email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the school, this is Mr. Jasper, the executive producer of the podcast network. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more.